Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to be discussing the verdict that was handed down in this Parkland shooting. For those who don't know what that is where this child came in, killed a bunch of kids here in Florida. They just now came down. Here's what the verdict says. They are saying that they will be giving him life in prison. Now you're going to see a lot of different types of headlines and a lot of stuff over the news next few days. It's telling you things like this up here that's saying, that they're not going to be able to find closure. So is that true? Will they not be able to find closure talking about the families? Well, let me tell you my personal experience with this. And I'm hoping that Florida is different than the state of Indiana in this retrospect. So after all of the trials and things happen, you get your sentencing out, then as a parent or as a survivor, your child has been a victim of a crime. You're sitting back and you're watching every year you have to go through these appeal process. Now, you hear that there's always a limited amount of appeals, but the way that the court system is swinging here lately, it seems like every year there's a new appeal on the man who murdered my children. For those who are wondering what that creep looks like, we're going to post that up here for you. So you might be wondering, so what's next for these families? They found a guy guilty, and not only have they found him guilty, but they also are coming in and saying, okay, life without eligibility of parole. That's where he's going to be at. They're going to do away with it, and that's it. But that's not what really just happens. Okay, so here's what you need to understand: is that is when the appeal process starts. Okay, and now how many appeals do they get? It's going to depend on the state, unfortunately. But one of the things I noticed is after the first couple years, you as a parent or a family member of the one that was the victim, you stop hearing from the prosecution's office. There's appeals coming up. You don't know when you'd like to go to them. You don't know when it happens. You end up reading about it in the news. You don't hear anything from them at all because they're busy doing their other stuff. They act like they care, and I'm sorry, but this is the truth about it. They act like they care when it's in the heat of the moment and in the news, and they're getting their publicity because we're coming up for elections for some of these prosecuting attorneys and stuff. But once it's finalized on that, but it's never finalized, they move on. You stop hearing from them. New prosecuting attorney takes office, the information gets lost, or just they don't even care, and they just move forward. And that's what happens in life. That's what happens in these situations. I'm telling you firsthand, that's what happens. But like the one community was saying, they said that they don't believe that there will ever be closure. And that's true. And I'm here to tell you that's true. Now, understand, closure is not the same as peace. Peace is found in God, but closure is understanding why, understanding what led them to it, why they decided to act like that, and why they decided to carry out their actions. It's never going to happen. Now they could come out and they could tell you everything you want to know, and then an hour later, a minute later, when you're at it, another question is going to pop up. Another question is going to pop up because understand this: to actually take the life of children, guys, that takes a special kind of evil influence. That takes a very reprobate mind individual, and that's what they are. That's what these types of people are. When you take innocent life, especially children and things like that, guys, there should be a special penalty for that. And you know what? There is. It says that it'll be worse for them on Judgment Day than anyone else. You're not going to find true justice in this world, unfortunately, guys. It will come from the Lord God Almighty. That's where that true justice is going to come from. But what we need to understand moving forward at this point, keep those families in your prayers because this is the time where the news and the calls and all the people that have been, trying to call and contact, keep them in the loop and help them and all that stuff, that's fixing to end. That's what's fixing to end. Unless it can be politicized by a politician, then they will march them up on the stand to have them give their stories and stuff for political gain. And that's the only time you hear from these people. When there's no political gain there, and I believe that's what happened in my situation is there was a prosecuting attorney that was in office and he did a very good job. His name was Levco, and I was like, you do what has to be done to make sure that justice is brought about. Well, he didn't win the election. He ended up getting, another guy that came up. which his name is Nick Herman. Now, I don't know who is prosecutors and stuff in those areas anymore. I don't keep up with that much. But what I can tell you is, because the sitting prosecutor was the one that I was like, and I wasn't even an Indiana resident at the time. I was like, news like, well, who do you want to try this case? Well, the one with the most experience, which was Lefko, because the other guy had never tried a criminal case except one time, and he was found ineffective as counsel in that type of these situations. So I was kind of worried about, maybe he wasn't going to be good in this position and stuff. But because I didn't back him, I no longer hear anything about what's going on with appeals and stuff, and that's why. That's why, because it's political. It didn't give him a political gain. I didn't jump on board with his wagon, so I didn't hear anything. Luckily, I do have a few friends that work up in those types of areas, and I can make a quick call and they can find out for me. So I don't always have to find out from the news, and that works out pretty nice. But you're not going to find that sense of closure that you're searching for, because it will always be another question. It will always be another what if. It will always be, well, if I had just, or if, maybe you're, whatever. It doesn't matter, and it's not going to change anything. What you have to do at this point is you have to learn where you're going to find peace and where you are going to be able to move forward and find hope again in this situation. And that's one of the reasons why I feel it's important to do the faith-based messages we've been doing, guys, because understand, I'm not going to seminary school and things like that. This is real life things that I've dealt with in life that God has helped get me through. And I know he can do the same for anyone. He can do the same for all those families that are affected by all of these different types of horrible events that happen. But you're not going to find any kind of closure in the courthouse system. You're going to be sitting there and there's going to be appeals come up. Then you're going to see where there's a liberal judge, and then they come in and they go, you know what, yeah, we'll give them right to an appeal. Or they might come in and they might actually just have enough judges to just write out, say, you know what, we're getting rid of it, and this is what we're going to do, time served. That has happened. It happens in California and it happens in New York, guys, a lot. These people will pull 10 or 15 years of a life sentence and then be released back into public, where they will re-offend. Understand that. They go right back out and they do the exact same thing they were locked up for. And that, I think, is one of the greatest fears in my life, is that eventually this person will just be turned loose to walk the streets. But when that happens, you have all these people that's going to tell you, well, if this happened, I would do this, or I would do that, or this is how I would handle it. But the truth is, you don't know how you're going to handle it, because I can remember speaking at some churches and talking with pastors, and like, if this had happened to my kids, this is what I would have done. I would have went and but the thing is, I would be saying the same thing. But the thing is when your heart and soul is ripped out of you in a situation like that, you don't know how you're going to react. You might react in anger. You might react in mourning, And but the fact is, however it hits you, if you take it to the Lord, the next step that you take is going to be the right one. If you step out in vengeance, you step out in anger, just as God tells us vengeance belongs to him, that's where it stands for. That's where you need to be focusing, is if one of those situations happen, don't sit around and like romanticize it in your head, guys. But if something like that was to happen, you need to be leaning on the Lord, so that he's going to direct you on the path, because he may have a plan for people like that. Understand, I'm sure that all of Saul of Tarsus' victims thought, this guy's going to burn in hell. He deserves any bad thing that happens to him. And then God gets a hold of his life, and it won a lot of souls over to the Lord. He led a lot of people to Jesus. And that's something we need to remember, is no one is beyond redemption. No one. We're not talking about a man who just attacked other men. We're talking about a man who attacked men, women, and children, entire settlements, entire towns, and they were on their own crusade to destroy Christianity, is what was happening in Saul's day. God gets a hold of him, changes his name to Paul, becomes a big soul winner. So that's why I tell you, when it comes down to things, you only see your narrative of it, your perspective of it. We're talking a lot about perspective here lately, because all we see is a pinprick, and how it really just affects us, or affects just those around us. But what we don't see is what God's going to do with that situation. So now, do I think that the process for death penalties takes way too long? Absolutely, I do. I absolutely think it takes way too long. And once it's in there, unless there's actual evidence that proves that they haven't done something, it should still stand. Not based off of political changes. And that's one of the things that I've always talked about with people is they would come up, and this is one of the biggest things. So, well, how do you feel about, marijuana? And it's like, that's for you to decide. That's for you to search out for God. He's going to speak it to you. I don't know what your situation is. Maybe you're a cancer patient. I don't know. I'm not going to judge people based off what they do. I have seen it destroy people's lives. Okay. But I do also know that it is used to help a lot of cancer patients in states and stuff. But they go, okay, well maybe not about the usage of it, but maybe about if they were busted and that state has now become a recreational state, should that ruling stand or should it be expunged off the record? Well, it should stand because at the time that the crime was committed, the law said it was illegal. It should stand. Just as death penalties should stand, because I don't care if the state decides to get rid of the death penalty, that's fine, but they need to take care of business of what happens, because when you assure a family this person is going to pay the ultimate price, and then you just abolish the death penalty, then you start turning these people loose on the street, it's not justice. That is not justice. And that's what people need to realize. They need to speed up the process. They need to figure it out. We keep looking at these chemicals and all this stuff. So we got to make it as painless as possible. My children were hogtied and burned alive in a fire. We'll make it as painless as possible. But that's the flesh speaking out, guys. People need to understand that. Just like everyone else. One of the reasons why I stopped speaking out about what the Lord does in your life and stuff over time is because people tend to get this mentality that, well, you never mess up. I mean, you're perfect. I need your advice and stuff like that. It's not true at all. I've made plenty of mistakes along this path, guys. I mean, we're talking, 12 years. I've made a lot of mistakes, man. I've made a lot of mistakes before that too. Everybody has sin in their life. Everybody comes up short. You may not come up and go, well, I'm going to sin today. But the fact is, you probably will. But that's where grace comes in. And we need to understand that it is not for us to extend or extinguish grace for somebody else. That is upon the Lord himself. That's where that lays. And that's the reality of life is we all feel justified, and the world may tell you you're justified in how you feel and how you want to react. But what does God say about it? What does he say? He says, vengeance is his. Okay? Why would we look at it from a standpoint of, well, vengeance belongs to the Lord? Because maybe he's got something in mind and in play for that. And maybe not even through the perpetrator of the crime. Maybe it's in your life. Maybe he's calling you to stand. Just as those families that were affected by Saul stood and said, okay, well, the Lord can use him. Now, his ministry was off to a rough start, guys, because you got to figure, you're sitting there and you're in the temple, and all of a sudden the guy who's hunting Christians walks in and is like, oh, hey, guys, the Lord sent me here to give y'all a message. How many of you are going to go, oh, hey, the killer's here. Let's give him a hug? None. But the fact is that it is not to us to judge on the big things of life and on the little things of life. While we can look at it and say, yes, that is sin, it is not for us to pass judgment upon them. That falls upon the Lord. And we do have judgment within our nations as well. But I do not see anything wrong with pro-death penalty. There's nothing wrong with that. But where people need to understand is times are changing. And just because someone has said, yeah, okay, well, they're going to be put to death, doesn't mean it's going to happen. Doesn't mean you're even going to know when it happens, because eventually the prosecuting office, they've done switched hands so many times and you're lost. You're just a case number and just a phone number laying in a dusty file, because as far as they're concerned, it's closed. Let's move on. They only revisit it once ever so often when there's an appeal court comes up and they go, okay, well, we got to get this out. Okay, well, here's what's going on. And they just blow through it and think about it. You've got lives, a person's life in your hand in that situation, and the lives of all of the family members that are looking on both sides. Understand, there's both sides. Do you think that person's family, do you think that shooter's family, the Parkland shooter, you think that his family wants to see that guy put to death? I'm sure they don't. Now, will they come out and say, no, we don't want this to happen? Probably not, because society will attack them in return. And understand, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to see your child harmed. But we do understand that there are legal recourses when things like that happen. And life in prison, down here, it should stand. And I don't mean 15, 20 years time served. I'm talking life in prison. You know, you spend the rest of your life in prison. God can still use them. Did you know that Paul, who wrote a large bulk of the New Testament Bible, that those verses that we hold to and we read and they speak so loudly to us, did you know that most of them were written with him in prison? Did you know not once did he ever say, you know what, I shouldn't be in here? No, he looked at it as this is the penalty for the deaths that he took in his own hands. That's the way Paul saw that. All right, he was paying that penalty, but he was continuing to give God glory, and he paid his ultimate life on that as well, guys. Now, I'm not saying that is justice. I'm not saying it's not justice. What I am saying is when he started the ministry and the Lord is talking to Ananias about Saul of Tarsus, I want you to go and talk to him. You're going to pray over him, and he's going to, what did he say? He says he's going to find out exactly how much he has to suffer for the namesake of Christ. And I would say that he did. But I also believe that he was forgiven, and any murderer can be forgiven, any of them. And it's not for you to decide whether or not they get that chance at grace. That is between them and God Almighty. I know that's hard to hear, but that's the reality of it, guys. That's not to say that there ain't moments where, you know, you get mad and you just like, you know, if I could get a hold of them or whatever. That's human. What does it tell us in the Bible about anger? It says, be angry, but sin not in that anger, and don't let the sun go down on that anger. That means before that day lets out, you don't want to sin in your anger because you're going to do something stupid. And before the end of the day, you need to be handing that over to the Lord. Don't walk around stewing in it and building up and building up and building up and then blow like Mount St. Helens, because chances are you're going to be one of those people that's waiting on one of those death rows or life in prison. If you do, guys, hand this stuff over to the Lord. It's where you're going to find peace. It's where you're going to find hope. Hope everyone has a wonderful day.